In the shadow of the standing stone, I feel the memory of the earth. Voices rising from the ancient dark, calling fire into rebirth. The old ones speak through breaking light, through wind that carves the sacred lore. They lift the past into the present, to guide the path we walk once more. Bringing the past to the present, for a future fast in flame, where wisdom flows like rivers old, and the stones recall our name.
Hello and welcome to another The Shaman and the Philosopher, and today our video is the midweek introduction video to our next guest. That it will be Jeff of North, as you know it, and Jeff to us. So I met Jeff. I've seen his videos before, and I met Jeff at the conference of APS conference in Michigan, and I didn't recognize him until I was in the question and answer table, and I started looking at him. Said, "Is that you, Jeff?" He said, "Yeah," and so we talked, and I liked him a lot. And then we had him as a guest, and then you met him, right?
I did. I got to meet Jeff this past weekend in person at the Quest for Ancient Civilizations conference. Yeah, we had a great conversation with Jeff. I was not too familiar with him, Ricardo, outside of just following on X, seeing his videos where he was going out and exploring these places on his own, right? So that echoed with my experience. So I jumped on Jeff for that reason early on and started following him. So when you mentioned talking to him with his work about the copper, I had already seen him hammering out the copper, trying to recreate sort of that process at home, seeing if he could, what it took to make some spear points. So I was excited to talk to Jeff, and that we cover all of that in our conversation that will be out Sunday. We talk about his upcoming trip to Egypt, which he has hence made with Michael Collins, Wandering Wolf, who is helping put on the conference we were at out there in Arizona this past weekend. And I met Jeff, and Jeff was one of the few sort of video, bombs I did. I was out there for several reasons, but let's just say when I've met Jeff, Ricardo, I was instantly reminded of the dudes I went to high school with. There was just this good, solid dude in front of me, all grins, all smiles, all light and energy, you know what I mean? And so even when I asked him what his favorite part of the conference was there in that little video, he remarked that, yes, the speakers are phenomenal, right? But what he was really noticing and feeling was this sense of community that was all around him. And I have to say, I echoed him in that video, and I echo him now, that was a major part of what was transpiring out there this weekend was so many of these people, such as Jeff and myself, right? Had never met before. You've been working online with these people, so you get a pretty, decent read, right, of the vibe. You can tell a good dude, but once you get there in person, instantly, different things can happen, right? And that was just the vibe of the whole weekend, and Jeff echoed that well. And it was a pleasure to get to not just Jeff, right? So I meet Jeff, and I'm instantly confirmed all the vibes I got from talking to him, everything Ricardo had told me. I was like, yeah, that's his dude, right? But it was that way kind of across the board, if you're wanting to transition now into any comments I have from that experience. That was the case across the board. Ricardo, I went out there for various reasons, right? There were multiple levels to this little weekend. They got thrown about thanks to Mike and Dave from Mike and Dave's Multiverse. you put out early on, that I was traveling as ambassador for the Institute for Natural Philosophy, right? So I had that, I had to wear. I'm there with Mike and Dave. They provided the ticket, so I feel as though I'm there with them. Mike and Dave have responsibilities, for the program as it turns out. So I felt a bit of, I need to hang with them, need to, I've got stage experience, background, need to fucking, if I can hold a mic or make sure shit's running smooth for these dudes. I was doing that, right? And then I was also with my X account trying to, sort of for us and for the shaman and the philosopher, put out just in the moment, my thoughts and all as I went along, right? So those were sort of the three, layers there were to my trip.
So if those were your objectives, why did the hotel ended but all but destroyed and you got arrested? Please.
I know, right? Why do you think at 5 a.m. you saw Dan Richards and I both ducking into different taxis going, yeah, we're out. Yeah, travel safe. Leave the fucking receipts with them. It's so true.
No.
Well, there was also, Ricardo, the last, there was personal reason. So not only am I, now in this sort of online sphere, right, where you and I have found ourselves talking to independent researchers, right? And you go to a conference like this, and that's who everybody is, right? They're independent researchers, So I was getting to sit there in these lectures and just soak up what it is independent researchers can do, what it is they are doing, right? When you sit there with the Hugh Newman, and I mean, I go on and on about what his notes are doing for just my own theories, right? And you see this guy putting out in total something that defines what the thing is that archaeologists have dug up, right? That right there shows you the power of an independent researcher. So you have that, I was letting all of that dawn on me so that I had that sort of knowledge and wisdom to bring back and discuss here, on our show where we're chasing, and talking with independent researchers. And the last personal, sort of motivation there was, Ricardo, and I'm sure the listeners have sort of gathered that for me personally, the work of Graham Hancock, and of course the work of Randall Carlson, have been extremely important to me. Everyone hears me talk about narrative blindness and how I walked myself out or was guided out, right, by spirit through this evidence I was finding on the ground. One must understand that in this shaman is also an intellect, a brain, like a normal human, right, that needs the knowledge, that needs the evidence, right, for me to accept what I'm seeing. So before I was finding this stuff on the ground, I had gone through basically every work of Graham Hancock I could get my hands on. And in total, when I see this work that is so well researched, better researched than, most academic books, even this one, the footnotes are there's two, So you pull up the other one, I'm not going to take our time, but I got Graham's Underworld right under there. You flip through that and the footnotes and the back notes, and it goes on and on and on, showing sources. So my intellect, right, as I'm going through this material he's putting forth, is able to be satiated, right? I have evidence. I then go and I look at some of Graham's videos and see what other people have to say about him, and then I see I have a good man as well. I've got a good man putting out this info that has now satisfied my intellect. And then when I can look at him and see a good man and see other people report the same thing, I now have that other part of me, when I'm choosing to accept information, you got to check out morally, dude. You just do, for me to sort of take on, info, right, heavily. So in Graham Hancock, I found all of that. Okay. And so you can now see when I started jumping out in central Alabama and I started seeing this shit, I was already well prepared. Right. And that's what his work had done for me. So that now when everybody goes and watches Antediluvian Alabama and you see me showing these huge just anomalies fucking everywhere. Right. I started and was able to accept what I was finding because of this man's work. Right. I quite by accident, see, Randall was supposed to be there. Randall, Lord love him, went through a medical emergency. I believe it was a kidney stone and could not make the trip. So graciously, that was one of the kind of behind the scenes things that was going on there that you got a whiff of. They arranged to have Randall appear by video and then Graham to appear by video and interview them, right? So that transpired, and then they were gracious enough to open it up for questions, right? And I'm sitting here, Ricardo, working on this theory that all of the dudes, the speakers, are talking on Karen Tepe and Göbekli Tepe, right? At Göbekli Tepe, they've got all the guys holding the penises, right? So we've talked to people. What do people tend to just infer from that? They go, "Oh, it's a fertility, place. That's where people were going to mix DNA and all that, right?" Well, if you've done any studies of Gilgamesh, right, which is our oldest sort of flood epic, we don't have to go into what that is. He's always pictured holding animals and holding his penis, right? And that alludes to a lesson that he had learned about putting your heart towards things of this world, right? Versus putting your heart towards things eternal. To paraphrase how it was put to him, is that worm in your hands in which you put your heart's, focus on will soon be food for worms. So why not put your thoughts on things eternal, right? And so spirit. So you have then Gilgamesh represented, holding that to represent shamanic power, right? So now when I see that at Göbekli Tepe, I see a different message, Ricardo, I've broken down in our videos how the triangular mound of rubble in the Kaaba, right, is pointing to a Sol Mart X, and behind it is a bunch of melted precious metal, okay? And inherent is in that is a message written down through the ages, in stone and landscape. It's the shamanic message. It's saying, here's where we went wrong. We turned ourselves to the material, right? And it brought all this destruction that we've now piled up to show you the error of our ways, right? When I look at Gilgamesh and I see in stone, him holding animals, right, and then holding the phallus, I see the exact same message. I see that original shamanic message, right, of turning away from the material and focusing on the spiritual. So I was fortunate enough, because I was prepped by these lecturers, to go up and pose that question to Graham Hancock and to Randall over the video call. To me personally, Ricardo, that was like a dream come true, bro. So of all the other things that were occurring on this weekend, right? All the other things, me in that moment, I was literally on cloud nine, for the rest of the day. Right. I got to go back up and ask Randall a second question after Graham had logged off. And, my work, Antediluvian Alabama, is tracing the evidence of the high heat, high energy event, right? The Younger Dryas. So I've always seen Randall online, all his work. He talks about the Pacific Northwest, right? And that area and what all happened with the flooding. And so I wanted to know, get some info as to what occurred here, so that I could reference that with everything that I'm finding on the ground. And he graciously, even in his condition, answered. I think we spent 6 minutes up there, man. I've got notes, and it ended with him volunteering. Me, at that point, I'm trying to hurry off the stage because, look, I even had a follow-up question to Graham, dude, and I just had to get myself off the stage because I'm so thankful and so appreciative of these two dudes that I was glad I was just holding it together, because I was there representing us. So that to me was the highlight of it all, man. The rest of it for me, my notes, I could go on about the theories that it goes much deeper. Hugh Newman started breaking down the animals that are recurring at Karen Tepe, and you and I will probably have to do a whole show just to go over the notes and the theory that I'm working on regarding tracing these diffusionists, bro. Because when you're sitting there and you're watching these detailed notes about what seem to be echoes of these diffusionists, whatever you want to call them, survivors of the incident, right? The catastrophe. Okay, well, I know because of what I found that they were here, right? What we call Alabama. I know that they also then came back and piled up this triangular pile of rubble and made this giant winged serpent earthwork, here just right south where I sit now. So as I'm getting all of this knowledge, these beautiful independent researchers, I'm able to frame it from the seed of knowledge I have, which is they were here. And so then the map, can start to form in my head, and I can start tracing out who went where, when, and possibly what echoed then down through each part of the world where these civilizers, you know, put themselves. So let's just say now, then we'll talk about quickly the people, Ricardo. Everybody, dude, everybody. Everybody I met was full of light and was full of purpose and was full of passion and not not in an ego-driven way, right? Which is weird. You expect when you go to things like this to possibly be bumping into a bunch of egos, and maybe it was because this was the first time. This is I just found out since that Robert Dakota. This was a first time event. There's more going on next year in Sedona, but this was the initiative event. Maybe it was because of that. Maybe it was because of him and his spirit that he was instilling in everybody. But that was what I noticed, man, was that everybody was there to get to know each other. That was part of it, but to support each other, right? To show up to each other's lectures, to help make sure everything went well, and then to be available to everybody that showed up to see them, you know. Um, yeah, that's it, man. I mean, unless you want me to go into particulars about surprises, Wandering Wolf, Michael Collins, and who I met for the first time there, and Gary Buchler, who I learned about for the first time last week and met for the first time out there. These two dudes have background lore, that I remind me of some of mine, addiction, all of these things. I talk about AA a lot. And look, when I first saw Gary, my instant impression is, okay, that's the dude that shows up to lead the AA meeting, to chair it. He just had that solid, grounded light about him, and that comfort. And like Michael Collins, it's just the same. When you're one of those people, you just see it on others. And I saw it on those two right away, even though I didn't know, much about either of their background stories. So that's probably my final note, Ricardo, is to say that I didn't spend a lot of time diving into conversation with a lot of these people. I really took the opportunity to sort of watch when I wasn't busy learning or helping, and I satisfied myself that every single person in this community is what they pretend to be, portend what they put out is indeed what you find in person. And my joke is, except for Dan, because Dan Richards puts out this certain, social media personality. But Lord love him in person. I've never seen just a more full of smiles and energy and light and just fucking happy-go-lucky. I'd see Dan coming in the hallway, dude, and I would have nothing to say to him. I just want to get in his way, just to have a second to look in his eyes, and he'd look back in mine, just because of the fucking energy he had. You know what I mean? I really would. I'd bump up to him, have nothing to say, and he'd just look at me and smile back. Jason, Dan, because he's just a ball of light. And so they were pleasant,
He sent me a message. Who is this crazy dude that keeps bumping into me?
Right, no doubt. Look, so many of these people, dude, you're meeting them for the first time, and you've been learning from them for a while. You've been, you know what I'm saying? You know that if you get the chance to have a conversation, which Sam and I did, the illegitimate scholar, and boy, he'll tell you, it was just, like Mike from Mike and Dave's Multiverse was there. So I was holding back, honestly, from trying to get too deep into conversation with anybody because I knew I would instantly get carried away, and they had their own things going on, with our shared interests and passions. I was just really pleased, overall, to meet everybody. Mike and Dave is killer, man. I roomed with Dave. So, you get to know somebody when you got to share a bathroom at a conference where sleep is like minimal, and you're stealing all your moments together. So I got to any real socializing time was with Dave and Mike. I got to meet Mike for the first time. Found out Mike lives over here in Columbus, right by me, dude. So we got to plan they want to go check out Moundville, and some of the stuff around here. So lots of, little seeds got planted. Nick, my old buddy Nick, who I haven't seen since he came down here to film for the documentary for us. Headless, Headless Giant Ben was who I now know as Ben. He didn't have his sunglasses on, and now I know his first name. So again, making friends. These were the dudes that I was hanging out with all weekend when I wasn't trying to, do what I was there for, right? And they made the weekend, dude. Again, I hope I didn't leave anybody out. Cody, East 10, right? I got to watch Cody. Cody got handed an opportunity, right? And not handed, I don't mean, he got given an opportunity to, again, first time putting this thing on. You want to try, taking a role in it. And you could just sit back and watch him do it, man. He did a really great job.
I bet he was born for it. So
He really was. And he was great. I mean, the performer and the director in me is constantly watching even the small things, right? And I'll give Cody a little funny, here's a back moment, calling him out, right? But as a director, it was brilliant. So Cody's up there at one moment and it's first trying to get going. And bless him, he's pulling something off the podium and like three things fall down. You know what I mean? It's like right as soon as he gets up there. Yeah, I mean, that's what most people in that scenario with people in front of them, they just instantly go, and it becomes a shit moment. No, he's rocking and fucking rolling the whole way. And that was like the only blunder I saw. And, I can't help, I'm not like, I spent a lot of time in stage, man. I spent a lot of time as a stage actor. I spent a lot of time as a stage director. So I just have that eye when I'm sitting there on the stage. And Cody really did. He did phenomenal. I watched this morning, he did a recap video. I didn't know what he was doing. I was watching him all weekend and just didn't think, he's got this doing his thing with his phone. And that last night we were all hanging out, and then all of a sudden Cody something hits him and he's off, with his phone. And now today I got to see the final product and what all that was. And it was just a wonderful, video that he did from start to finish, filming each day, the affair. So not only was he there taking care of things in person, doing the MC work, doing all of that, but at the same time, he was doing all this other shit for putting out product as well. As he handled it like a pro.
So
who else,
in
dude?
sum, you never want to do it again.
Yeah, now that I started mentioning folks, I don't want to leave it. So our other guest, Ed Cassis, I met Ed. He's the only other person I did a video with. I wanted to do our two guests that I bumped into. And man, Ed is I couldn't have seen the thing now that I saw the event with Ed, right? I couldn't see the event without Ed. That's what I got on Ed, dude. His energy, right? Whether anybody knew who he was or what he was there for. Everywhere you looked was this bearded, jovial laugh like, Santa, just at everything, and as you saw in our little commercial I did with him, he's quick, he's on the draw, super intelligent dude. And, all the vibes I got from him, Ed's not shy about his theories, right? And not everybody's going to follow Ed all the way to the end with his theories. I don't follow him all the way to the end with his theories, right? Which is the case with so many of the people that were there at this conference or at any of these conferences, right? So many of them, you may not go all the way, right? With them.
But now if you think about it, who goes all the way with anybody else?
With anybody, right?
Right.
So, to clarify that, then you have a guy like Ed who is upfront with a theory that he knows not everybody's going to go all the way with, right? Now, you can imagine how human beings can react to being that, Ricardo. There's a lot of ways I might walk into a conference, right? If I know that my idea is out there, right? I would probably walk in a little, and Ed just brought the joy and the love, right? Every which way he went. I didn't spend a lot of time in the bar. I don't drink, but they did have really great club soda, actually with like baking soda in it. It tastes great. So I was in there getting refills of that. And I bumped in, and Ed's just, him and Dan Richards, fucking lives of the party. And not in any like performative way. You know what I mean? Just like they're loving it. They're loving it. So you're going to love hanging out and being around them, right? I would invite Ed to any get together. Without hesitation. It's not going to fail with him. Yeah, so many other people, man. I think I've named most names. I got briefly to chat with Billy Carson. Again, man, we all have seen Billy Carson's story arc. There it's not gossip, right? We've all watched this in public. A human being can react a lot of ways in that scenario, bro. I can't think of many that would react the way I saw Billy Carson react.
You have
Uh,
to understand that, as I told you, the only thing I know about Billy Carson is the name Billy Carson. I have
yeah, okay.
no idea
So
of what his work is.
so his let's just
Unfortunately, I
say,
don't.
yeah, I don't even feel the need to gossip, but he's
No,
just
no, yeah, don't need.
some of his work has been challenged in public and in debates. He had a big debate with a Christian. I'm Christian, at least fucking Dead Sea Scrolls, but Wes Huff is a prominent Christian, right? Who sort of they had a debate, and Billy got whatever called out on some stuff, and it was slightly embarrassed as it turned out, because there's footage of him trying to get the debate back before it aired, right? And just there was all this, it just jumbled up, okay? And I've never gone all the way with Billy, and there's some of the things that Billy said that I personally knew to be just, you know. But there was always something that drew me to, there was still a reason I kept paying attention to. And I could never reconcile maybe why that was, because there was a reason I was drawn to some of his things he was saying. And there was much of it where I was like, you know, I kind of got to resolve that within myself when I saw him this weekend, right? Again, let's go back to when you're in person, you get to see someone's character, no matter what is thrown at you by media, okay? And what I saw was a hardworking, confident dude, right? I mean, he got the best crowd reaction, right, out of anybody there. So the material he presented, much of it was based on native. I've learned that his father, I don't want to misspeak, his father or grandfather is full native. And so much of where he's speaking and walking, he's centering sort of there, which I appreciate. And then at the meal, I didn't mean to, but I ended up at his table. I'm already sitting down, and I try to avoid the big tables at meals. I'd like to go eat by myself at these functions, like outside, and I did that a couple of times. But you also like to take advantage of the community, and watching. But I don't want to be at any of the tables with the dudes I'm really going to want to talk with or whatever. So I just pick a table. It looks like a bunch of fans, nobody knows me. I'm going to go sit down. And it turns out they're Billy Carson fans, oh yeah, Cody was sitting there. That's why I grabbed it, because Cody was like, sit there. And I sit down, and then as I'm just eating my burger, here comes Billy Carson. And like me, he's got his burger without his bread. You notice the little things at first, right? And here he is with this meal where he could be having it anywhere. And he had committed to sitting down with these three dudes, not to interview, but because they were there to see him, you know? And so they just sit there and
That's good
they
of him. That's good of him.
yeah, you know what I'm
I
saying?
understand he's a big dude, right? He's has a huge following. I'm not sure, but I think he has a huge
Yeah,
following.
I mean, he does. Again, I was just I'm giving my personal impressions, right? And in fact, that was, I didn't even try to speak to him from our podcast perspective. I actually just went up to him and gave him some kind words as he was rushing out the door. I was honest with him, I said, I've been watching your story arc, and this weekend I got to see your character, and I shook his hand and said I was very glad, and proud I got to be here, and meet him. And that just gives you the example across the board, dude, of every single person exceeded. I never try to carry expectations, especially if I'm going in to observe. We all know narrative blindness, right? But whatever expectations I could have had about these individuals based on my digital, observation of them, was completely exceeded. Completely
Sure.
exceeded.
Sometimes you have this never meet your idols, right? Never, or
Correct. And I
when
did.
you go there and you talk with these people, they are all people. They are just like you and me, right?
Sometimes, Ricardo, listen, this is not my first rodeo. Not only in these past few years have I made the trip to Mar-a-Lago, right? But in my youth, man, I bartended in Broadway theaters, like in the theaters, you know what I mean? So I was privy to everything that happened on 42nd Street, because I was in Joe Allen's afterwards with them all, you know what I mean? And my report would not sound a lot like this one, Ricardo, if I were to fully, give you my opinions on those particular idols when I met them, right? To be
Yeah,
fair.
I was talking about in our game, not in, right?
Yeah, and the other, yeah,
Yeah.
there is truth to don't meet your heroes. There really is, but there wasn't in this case, man.
But in here is the people that we see on video, is the people that we're following, some of them for
Right,
years and years, right? And then you
right.
get to meet them and they are just open to talk and to sit and to as anybody else.
It goes back to that passion, right?
Yeah.
You know, the reason it is so is because each of these people is indeed passionate about the topics, and then of course the big picture as a whole. Once you have a group of people who have their own drive, right? Their own passion. They don't need you for they don't need you to put together what they have going because they are self-motivated, right? Mm. When you have a bunch of people that manage to have that, but also manage to have an appreciation for the whole, an understanding for the role that we all need to play for the whole, right? Now, once you have those two in an individual and you are able to get multiple of those together, then you indeed have a rare combination, at least in my experience, from business to entertainment to fucking blue collar warehouses, right? That finding that is a rare thing. And I'm not trying to like make this weekend, whatever. I wasn't on the production side. I don't know what all went on backstage. I don't know the ins and outs of what may or may not have made it a great weekend. You know what I mean? But from my perspective, Ricardo, there were a lot of those people. There were a lot of those people. And that leaves me with great hope about our future. I went to, Ricardo, one other conference. I went to an official Southeastern Archaeological Conference. We don't even count the years now, 4 or 5 years ago now. And now that was huge, right? Those are big affairs, so it was impossible to sort of get a vibe, right? So I can't really compare, I don't want to do anybody any disservice, but all of my experience had me very impressed and feeling very hopeful about this community because I saw a lot of those individuals that had not only this sort of self-motivating passion about them, but also had this, I don't mean to be making the cross, but it's fucking what it is. You've got things that support and things that, right, but also had these arms outstretched, for the whole, and that's my report, bro. If I didn't go too long-winded for you,
No,
without
not at
getting
all.
into some of the fun of my theories, which I think I touched on. So Jason, all the way around, dude, I can't help but say it was nothing but positive. My theories grew. My appreciation for the independent researcher community grew. My hope, my joy, my understanding of what all lies ahead for this community and for our ability to fucking get it together, right? It grew. And I got a personal dream fulfilled, along the way, and made a whole bunch of friends, reignited some old ones.
So
Just grateful.
as a conclusion, you completely hated it.
It's terrible. Fucking wouldn't recommend it. Don't go again.
Terrible conference.
Thank God the THC was legal because that thing was not even tolerable. I don't know how. Robert Dakota, what were you? Dude, we got to talk. Listen, I can make all those jokes because, it's exactly the opposite. I had to go find Robert Dakota, dude. We were all circled out. This shit was shut down, man. And we were, I had to leave. I had to leave at like 5 the next morning. I had to get up at 4, and I see him standing way the fuck across the courtyard, directing the last few vendors to get out of there. And I just had to beeline to him, didn't even introduce myself, just had to walk up to him and tell him, I've seen a lot of events, I've seen a lot of things put together, and the spirit that was in this place overall, from your vendors to whatever, you got to be commended on, right? And he doesn't know me from Adam's cat. He hugs me and he says, the light's going to win this thing, man. We're going to get it together. Right? Now, that was the last person I spoke to and my last official impression. And it was also, as you heard me say, sort of the wrap up of my notes, Ricardo, is that whatever got started here, I have full faith and confidence in, and that's the best I can say about my report. To thank everybody that helped make it happen. To very much hope to see you all again in any capacity. Yeah.
I can only hope that all our plans that although our PR session for the institute is a little bit delayed because we are making huge changes on the website, but
Everything in its
but
right time.
yeah, but I hope that in a short time, perhaps in a year and a half, we'll be able to give the conditions to these people to set not only conferences this but many more because they won't have to pay for the space. It is our space. So I hope we can help to bring all of this, that these people are doing this hard work. We can help them to give it in even higher heights and more fruition and more collaboration between all of these independent researchers because we all need one another. So
Right. And that's the other thing, Ricardo, that to take away, dude, is because I know I was there, right? And we are building the Institute for Natural Philosophy. And so it was constantly, taking in data, because it's where we want to go. And it was my first experience at seeing something like that. Um, yeah, but all in all, just an honor, dude. Just that's all I can say. I can only officially end this wrap up with I'm grateful and honored and just so pleased that everybody was more than what I could even think they would be.
and our thanks to the generosity of Mike and Dave's
Dave,
for being a big part in you being there. So
a huge part. And Dave, so the rooms had a fold-out sofa, and Dave was like, "Well, you take my fold-out sofa," And so we split it, but it was perfect because the rooms were divided by doors, and so we had our own space. But it was, man, much of it, if I'm honest, was you got the feeling of being like back at boys' camp or something in school, and I mean that in the most innocent and like coolest way, dude. That's not, I mean, I'm 46, I do have two children, right? But experiencing something on that level with dudes that you trust, where you're able to recapture some of that, hanging out with friends, nowhere to go for 3 days, but right where you are, and that was just brilliant, and it would not have been possible without Dave and Mike, and yeah, I can't thank them enough for that because it really was. It was just like whenever we weren't engaged in the work and the learning, it was just like being back at camp. Where are you going? We're going to the canteen? I got to go take a shower. No, you don't. Come on. And it's just, it was just really great.
oh well, I think it's all that for this one.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
just
Join
just
us.
enforce. We'll see a trailer soon from our episode with Jeff, and it will be premiering this Sunday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central. Is that correct?
Yeah. Sounds good to me. 8 Eastern, 7 Central, Sunday. Come get to know Jeff with us, guys.
Sure.
Really, really love Jeff, and he's another big part of this community that's being built. So you got to go check him out, follow him, and
Exactly.
please come see us Sunday and holler at him.
Jeff F. North, both on X and on YouTube. Right. And it's a wrap
If
then.
you are an independent researcher, artist, communicator, what else, Ricardo? If any of these things that we have been talking about sound like things you would like to be a part of, or if you have information that you believe would be relevant to the whole, we would like to talk to you at the Shaman and the Philosopher and the Institute of Natural Philosophy. Ricardo?
Absolutely. As a last note, and I will be repeating this over and over, we are looking for 1 or 2 volunteers to take care of our digital library so that we can make it accessible for everybody. So if you have the patience to label we'll start with about 150 to 200,000 files, I'm sorry. Not 200, it's 200,000 files. Part of the job is done, not much, but if you wish to volunteer, just contact either of us and we'll lead you to the proper channels and see if we can do this together. So apart from that, my name is Ricardo Calvario, my co-host
Jason Huffman.
So thank you all and a very fond farewell.
See you on Sunday, guys.